Hi. Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today with you. So, I'm going to present our project that is about the comparative safety and efficacy of cognitive enhancers for Alzheimer's dementia. And this was an individual patient data network meta-analysis. Next slide, please. So we have no conflicts of interest in relation to this presentation, but this project was funded by the CHR Drug Safety and Effectiveness Network. Next slide, please. Great. So Alzheimer's dementia is the most common type of dementia, and there are several effect modifiers such as sex and disease severity that may impact on the patient's response to the medication. And our aim was to examine the comparative effectiveness of and safety of cognitive enhancers according to the patient's characteristics. So we aimed to individualize the management of the patients with Alzheimer's disease and to fill this knowledge gap for decision making. Next slide, please. So we conducted a systematic review and we identified 9 different treatments, and we included 8 unique studies in this systematic review. In this network plot, you can see the evidence, the flow of evidence of the systematic review that we have identified. So each different node represents the different treatments, and it is proportional according to the number of patients that was included in the specific treatment, and each edge corresponds to at least one study that compares the treatments that it connects. So you can see here I have highlighted with different colors the studies that the edges that are informed by different the different type of studies, by studies with individual patient data and aggregated data, or studies that are informed by only aggregated data. So I have also added the values, the numbers actually of the studies that we have included in each of the different treatment comparisons. And in a parenthesis, we can see the number of studies with the individual patient data. So you can see that the majority of the studies that inform this systematic review and this network meta-analysis that we conducted later on are informed by aggregated data. Next slide, please. So in total, as I said, we included 80 unique studies, but we also included 16 companion reports. So in total, we have 96 studies that we contacted the authors and the sponsors of these studies in order to obtain the individual patient data. Of the 96 studies, we were able to obtain the individual patient data for the 14 studies. However, 2 of the studies were not eligible for the network meta-analysis, and this is because one study did not report any data on the treatment group, and the other study did not report the outcome data. We only had data for the patient's characteristics. So the 12 studies that we included in this systematic review and network meta-analysis with individual patient data, 2 of them were sponsored by AbbVie and were available through the Vivli platform. Only a single study was not available by AbbVie. Next slide, please. So these 2 studies compared donepezil versus placebo, and both included where we were able to obtain data on the MMSE and the serious adverse events outcomes. Next slide, please. And if we can also press next. Great. So donepezil and donepezil plus memantine were the treatments of the network meta-analysis that showed that were the most effective treatments and improved MMSE, the MMSE score importantly. Next, please. When we conducted a subgroup analysis for the network meta-analysis, we found that for the participants with moderate to severe cognitive impairment, a larger improvement was observed for the donepezil and memantine alone, and their combination donepezil plus memantine. The least effective cognitive enhancer was the oral rivastigmine, but overall, the cognitive enhancers for the specific subgroup were well tolerated regarding the serious adverse events. Next, please. So for participants with mild to moderate cognitive impairment, we found that donepezil and transdermal rivastigmine were most likely the best treatments, but all except for one treatment were associated with increased odds of a serious adverse event. But likely this was not statistically significant. Next, please. So far, the challenges that we encountered during the whole process, first of all, was the identification of the studies, especially for studies that were published before the 2005 and were not, did not have an NCT number, were not registered with the clinical trials board. Then the data ownership, especially for those studies that were co-sponsored by multiple sponsors. And another challenge was that while we were navigating the data, some of the sponsors switched the platforms. So we had to familiarize ourselves with the platforms from scratch. So as you can imagine, since we didn't have the data, the patient level data for all the studies, for all this that were included in the systematic review, and since we had to conduct the analysis through different platforms, a one-stage analysis was not possible as we planned in our protocol. Also, we encountered challenges regarding the software availability. For example, some packages that we required for our analysis from the R software were not available, or some of them were older versions and we couldn't really work on those. Next, please. Another challenge was the time associated in order to conduct the analysis and to have access to the data. And some of the platforms actually provided us, they could provide us with more time when, of course, we could pay for that. A cost that was associated also in some cases when we required some extra information, for example, for the additional medications information, where we had to obtain a license for that. So although we obtained individual patient data from the different sponsors and the different platforms, we didn't always obtain the full information that we required for our analysis. In some studies, as I said before, for example, one study had available data only for the placebo group. Another study had only data available regarding the characteristics of the patients and not the outcome data. Another study provided us with coded values for the follow-up time, so we weren't sure how to judge what was the first and the last date. So things like that were the challenges that we encountered during the whole process. Next, please. So overall, we found that newer studies with a larger sample size and a smaller treatment effect were more likely to have individual patient data that was available. Next, please. Overall, we know that well-conducted individual patient data network meta-analysis facilitate tailored decision-making. Next, please. However, so far, individual patient data is not yet well established in the field of Alzheimer's dementia. So we require more efforts in order to achieve this goal. Next, please. And in this systematic review, we were able to obtain the 15% of the eligible studies, of the eligible RCTs. But the good news is that we were able to obtain extra data, more data on the studies, that these data were not reported in the publications. Next, please. So a big challenge, a big concern probably is the missing data, the dropouts that we have in the Alzheimer's dementia RCTs, and especially when some of the studies are using proper methods to deal with that. Next, please. Overall, our results show that cognitive enhancers with a large treatment effect in the MMSE score are associated with high risk of a serious adverse event. Next, please. And considering a minimally clinically important difference at 1.4, all treatments except for 3 were clinically important for cognition. Thank you so much. And I especially thank all my co-authors that really helped me all this time with this project, and of course Vivli and all the data sharing platforms that made that project feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, Argi.